Good evening, people. I'm glad you're here with us tonight. If you want to put your name and where you're from, or just where you're from, into the chat, that's always nice to see. Let people get logged on and ready before we begin. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to all of you from the International Dyslexia Association, Northern New England Alliance, serving Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. I'm Susan Horahan, the president of IDA-NNEA, and we're welcoming to our Read for Parents webinar featuring Elaine, Kaya, and Hayden Miskinis as they discuss accommodations at the secondary level and answer some of your questions. As a branch, we're thrilled to provide these Read for Parents webinars every other month, which focus on different IDA fact sheets and areas of interest to families and educators. The IDA fact sheets are a great tool in informing families and professionals alike on the journey of dyslexia. As many of you parents and practitioners can probably relate, getting structured literacy instruction for students in need is more often than not a difficult journey for parents, students, and for teachers. As a branch, we are honored to bring these informative sessions to you as we work to bring structured literacy to all students in all classrooms, and especially to those who struggle. To support today's session, we have Andrea Pollack managing the technical aspects of the webinar. We also have Chris Riley, who will be monitoring and adding valuable links and resources into the chat. During the session, please use the chat to respond to prompts from the presenters. Please save your questions for the end of our webinar, where we will have approximately 20 minutes for question and answers facilitated by Andrea and Chris. Please note that certificates of attendance are not issued for these Read for Parents webinars. Today's webinars and handouts will be posted on our website within the week. Please consider joining our branch and inviting your friends and colleagues. There are many advantages, including connecting with our community, staying informed, great deals like IDA TV, and opportunities for expanding your network. There are a variety of different membership levels, and if you look them over, that one is surely appropriate for your needs. Our branch has a number of activities, including Read for Parents, like tonight's presentation, Read for Professionals, and our upcoming free professional development webinar in September on Structured Literacy 101 with Nicole Chick. Tune in until the end of tonight's session for more details at that time. We also collaborate with Wilson in March and June. We have an annual conference coming up on March 21st, 2025, and our newsletters come out a couple times each year. We also offer scholarships, and we have a new Reading League New Hampshire chapter that we'll be collaborating with. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for this evening. I'll start with Elaine Miskinis. Elaine is a high school English teacher, writer, and advocate for dyslexic learners. She has spent 22 years in the classroom, and as the parent of 2 high school students, she is well versed on the challenges students face regarding accommodations in high school. Next, we have Kaya Miskinis. Kaya is a 9th grader who began her journey with dyslexia interventions when she was in 2nd grade. As a result of early interventions, Kaya is now an avid reader who is especially fond of Shakespeare. Dyslexia still has an impact, though, particularly when it comes to spelling, and Kaya also struggles with dyscalculia, which impacts her ability to retain math facts. Overall, though, Kaya is a testament to the power of early interventions, and she enjoys challenging herself with a full course load of honors classes, and she was recently accepted into the Brown University pre-college summer program. When she's not at school, Kaya can be found working at a retirement home where she helps care for elderly residents or curled up with a good. Hayden Miskinis is an 11th grader who began getting interventions in 4th grade. Up to that point, she could not read, but after 2 years of interventions, she went on to become a strong reader and a skilled writer. When she was in 7th grade, Hayden wrote an essay about her challenges with dyslexia that was published in the New York Times. She is now an advocate for students with dyslexia and an honors student. Hayden is currently illustrating a book titled Lena and the Thinking Tree about a young girl who is struggling with the challenges of dyslexia. When she's not drawing or advocating, Hayden is training in a pre-professional ballet program where she trains in the Vega Nova technique. Did I do that all right? Did I pronounce it right, Hayden? Okay, so without any further ado, I will turn it over to the Miskinis family.
Hi. I'm going to start, and we're going to kind of move backward in time. We're going to start with the end of the high school experience, looking toward college, and then high school, and then kind of the beginning stages. So myself, and then Hayden, and then Kaya. So we're going to move sort of backward through time a little bit. But just to sort of give an overview of kind of how we got here. So both Kaya and Hayden were identified with dyslexia when they were in elementary school, and they can definitely talk more about some of the challenges in getting the right accommodations even in elementary school, and then how that transitions into high school when the need for self-advocacy becomes stronger. Because certainly when the kids are little, when they're younger, it's really the parents' role, and a lot of us really take on that role often of kind of mama bear and really advocating for our kids, and then trying to take that step back as they get older into high school and really allowing them and helping them to self-advocate is its own challenge as a parent. And it's definitely, I think the girls would say, it is something that parents often find challenging because we spend so much of our time advocating for our kids that allowing them the space to self-advocate can be difficult. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Hayden's going to talk a bit about what advocacy looks like for high school students who want to take high-level courses, because oftentimes they do get sort of tracked into lower level courses, and that even when they don't want to be tracked that way, that often happens. So Hayden's going to talk a bit about that and the advocacy that goes into taking the courses that they want to take, and I think also some of the challenges that come with that in terms of the accommodations, particularly when you get into AP and honors classes, where sometimes teachers aren't necessarily as amenable to accommodations. It can be more difficult to advocate for them in certain classes. So Hayden's going to talk about that a bit. And then Kaya, I think, is going to talk about some of the unexpected challenges in other areas that come in high school. In her case, math particularly, but again, also finding ways to self-advocate when you're now in an environment where parents aren't necessarily as involved and aren't necessarily invited to be involved in the same ways that they are in elementary school. What I'm going to talk about, though, is actually the end stages, looking out of high school, looking toward college. And the reason for that is once you get into high school, we're really starting to look ahead toward what comes next. And certainly there are so many paths now. There's military, there are trade schools, there's taking a gap year and working and kind of finding where the next path is going to lead. And all of those are absolutely viable, solid options. I'm going to speak more to those students who are looking toward college, because one of the things that I have found, and definitely that the girls have found, and people who have dyslexic learners have often found, is that very often they are directed away from college towards some of these other options. Nothing wrong with those options, absolutely, but oftentimes students are geared toward them, and college is really not always addressed as an option or a possibility, Or if it is, it's very often addressed as, well, do 2 years in a community college and see where it goes. Again, very viable option. Financially, it's a great option. And it can be a wonderful opportunity for students to find their footing. So it's not to discredit any of those choices so much as to present the reality that when those aren't the options that a student is looking at, sometimes there are other factors that they do have to consider. So looking at some of those, for students who are looking toward college, particularly four-year colleges, some of the things that I found in my journey that I was not really anticipating um, were situations, for example, like being exempted from certain courses. World languages, both of the girls, actually you girls can speak to that too, if you can write down notes. Languages can be an enormous challenge for students with dyslexia. And one of the challenges looking toward college can be they want to see 3 to 4 years of a world language. And you will hear people talking about getting exemptions for those language requirements. Some colleges are fantastic about those exemptions. They will look at a student's portfolio, they'll look at them as a whole learner and say, oh yeah, this is a student who's really strong, but really probably would not be successful in a traditional, French or Spanish class. And they offer waivers. However, there are a number of colleges and universities that don't do that. And what they will do is it's basically what we would call a wait and fail approach, which some parents are familiar with from elementary school, right? Where they don't give interventions until the kid is failing. And then all of a sudden, once they've failed for a period of time, now interventions are an option, but not until they have failed, right? Similar in college sometimes, where they will not allow for a waiver until a student has failed a course. And then they will meet as a committee and decide whether or not they will then waive that requirement for the student. Enormously problematic if you have a student who's on a scholarship, a student who's gotten merit aid, a student who's an athlete. So one of the things that I recommend is approaching the college at the early stages and asking what their policy is for languages. If that is an issue that your student struggles with, if that's a subject that they struggle with, I feel like that pretty early on. I don't know, girls, if you want to talk before we move on to other things, if you guys want to talk a little bit about the language piece and how world language factors in high school as a dyslexic learner. Not to put you guys on the spot, but Hayden, you could probably start, and the guy, you can jump in.
Yeah, so I had the requirement of a language starting in 8th grade, where we could pick either to study French or Spanish. I chose Spanish, and at this time, our Spanish teacher actually left our school to join another school. So they gave us the option to study on VLAX. I learned through that experience that it is not only hard for me to learn through VLAX, but it's very difficult to learn another language with dyslexia. Not that it isn't possible, it definitely is, but for me, I found a lot of struggles with reading the words, the memory aspect of it, and just really all of the factors that it took to learning that language kind of brought me back to 3rd grade while learning how to read and write English, which wasn't really a fun experience to remind myself of that. So not that it isn't possible to learn another language with dyslexia. I would say it is more difficult and it takes a lot of work. But I also don't know if my experience would change if I had an in-person class with an in-person teacher. I think having one-on-one support in the classroom would help a lot with my experience. I personally, after trying to do it on VLAX, I stopped. And starting freshman year, I started to learn ASL online, which I found to be really more enjoyable for me. I felt like learning to talk with my hands and having that tactile reinforcement really helped me. Throughout my dyslexia journey, I remember writing in sand and using the like gel boards and everything. So I definitely feel like having that tactile placement in learning another language helped me a lot. So I was able to complete my 3-year language requirement for the honors diploma by doing ASL instead. And I really enjoyed learning ASL, and I thought that for a person who has dyslexia, I thought that was a really nice language. And I felt like the tools I learned by learning how to read helped me learn ASL. So yeah, that was kind of my high school experience with learning another language. Kaya, you wanna talk about
Um,
yours?
yeah, so I had a little bit of a different experience. I was required to take a language in 7th grade at a different school I was going to. And this was a Montessori school, which means that they start learning how to speak Spanish in about like kindergarten, 1st grade. So not only was I forced to do Spanish in 7th grade, I was in a class with other kids my age that have been speaking this language for years now. And so it was really difficult. I definitely struggled with all the like aspects Hayden already covered, but I did find it was really helpful to have a teacher there. And when I went into high school, I did end up doing another Spanish course my freshman year. And yeah, I struggled with it. I really, really wanted to like stick with it and like really see it through, but it was really, really hard for me, and I don't think I would have been able to pass the class if I didn't have the teachers I had. I had really, really nice, understanding teachers that would talk with me before and after class and give me like more time on work. And I even had a teacher that would change certain like packets for me. She had these packets where they would have these word scrambles, and you had to unscramble these words and like figure out like what these word scrambles were. And she immediately, without me saying anything, was like, "Oh, Kaya, I'm not gonna make you do this. I'm gonna give you something else," which was very, very kind of her. But even after that whole year, I did decide that I'm going to start next year doing ASL. But it was definitely like it was an interesting experience with dyslexia. It's definitely different, and I don't think everyone understands that like how different it really is for us. But I personally still really liked it. And if you're very determined and you really, really do want to learn this language or any language, it's definitely worth giving a try.
Well, and before we move off of world languages, one of the questions that I saw in the chat kind of ties into questions of accommodations. And I don't know if either of you had any specific accommodations in world language that you felt were helpful. I know, Kaya, you mentioned not doing word scrambles, which of course any parent of anybody who's ever navigated dyslexia knows. Even from, I remember 1st and 2nd grade getting these word scramble homework things and just wanting to tear my hair out because you guys couldn't do them. I get the New York Times, those little games every day, and the word scramble word ones, I will never get those. That will never happen. So that might be an accommodation for people to consider before we get off of world language into some of the other ones. Are there any other specific accommodations that you guys would recommend people look at for high school languages?
I personally worked online, so I kind of had my own timeline, but picturing myself being in a classroom, I think that extra and extended time would be very helpful for language, just because for other classes like English and math and all those subjects, extra time is very helpful for me. So definitely for another language, having to uncode the words, having to break down each syllable of the words or decode and all of those aspects definitely takes more time for me. And I think while doing my assignments online, I don't really have someone to compare to for how fast that they were able to complete it, but I do think that it took me longer than the average student. So I picturing myself in a classroom setting, I think I would definitely benefit from extra time as an accommodation. I don't know if Kaya, being in a classroom, if you had other accommodations.
One that I can think of that I also have in just English class is not getting points off for spelling. I already have that in all my other classes, but that was really, really big with a language just because obviously if I can't spell in English, I can't spell in Spanish either. And they definitely like it's there's just no learning how to because you can't really sound out words because there's so many silent like everything's. So that was a really, really big one. That and like if like my teacher and I had this whole setup where like if she wasn't quite sure what I was trying to tell her, but she didn't want to take off points because I was spelling it wrong, we would just kind of talk it out and I would tell her what I was trying to say and then she can decide like how many points I would get on it. But I think that was like the biggest one.
Helpful. And that kind of transitions us into accommodations and experiences in honors classes in general. And again, the only reason I'm gearing this more toward honors level classes is that our experience has been that oftentimes those are where at the high school level more of the blocks come in. Students who are in kind of general level classes, at least in our experience, really haven't gotten quite as much of the pushback in terms of accommodations. When you get into honors level and AP classes, that's where it can get a little bit more challenging, I think, sometimes to get accommodations and to help teachers to understand the need for accommodations, even in those higher level classes. And I'm nervous about sending you guys to the floor with this one because there's so much to say. But Hayden, do you want to talk a little bit about just trying to navigate into honors classes as you started high school?
Yeah. So for me, honors classes started in about 7th and 8th grade. So I'll briefly talk about middle school and then jump into high school. I remember my first experience trying to get into a honors class was when I was in math class. It was kind of pre-algebra, and all of my friends got into the honors class without having to fight, without anything. It was just a recommended class for those students. I was in the normal class, and I really excelled in that math class. I was doing really well. I felt like I was able to push myself into that honors class. So I had the conversation with my teacher and asked her how I could work to be in that honors class because I feel like my abilities, I was able to keep up with that classwork. And they did not want to place me in the honors class. They were very hesitant about it due to my IEP. And so it took about half the year for me to get into the honors class. And I ended up acing the class. Enjoyed it, but the process to getting into it was not easy. And that kind of was the same throughout high school. In freshman year, trying to get into honors algebra, they were again very hesitant about letting me in. I ended up having frequent meetings with the head of the math department, my math teacher, the school counselors, all of the heads at the school. And I kind of had to state my case on why I believe I could take the class and why I believe that I could excel in the class. And I don't think that should be the case. I think if I feel like I can take an honors class and I want to take an honors class, that should be an opportunity I am given. Especially because my previous math teacher gave a recommendation saying that I could be in that class, they were still hesitant to put me in it based on my dyslexia, which, yes, dyslexia impacts math. Yes, I need accommodations in math, but I don't think that should stop me from taking the harder class, and if I want to take the harder class. So in the end, I was able to take honors algebra, but again, it was a fight every year, no matter what age, no matter if I took the previous honors math class. And I think that that really is something that needs to be changed. It needs to be looked at. I am grateful enough that I had supports in place and I had my mother to help me throughout the journey, and really advocate for myself. But thinking of all of the students who don't have that support behind them is really saddening to think about, because I'm sure that there are many students wanting to take harder classes and are told, no, you can't do it. And then they don't take the harder classes. And they really value their worth on what those teachers say. And I don't think that that should ever be the case. So yeah, I think advocating really came in handy. I really had to learn how to fight for myself and fight for what I want. This past year, I took AP English language, and I definitely got some blank stares. I got some questions being like, oh, how do you think you're going to take that class with dyslexia? And I told them, as long as I get my accommodations met, I think I'll do just fine. And that was kind of the case. I was able to get extra time on the AP exam, which helped me a lot. I don't think I would be able to complete it without my accommodations. And yeah, that's kind of just to say that don't limit yourself to what you think you can or can't do based on what others tell you you can and can't do. That's kind of, if you want something, you should be able to fight to get it. And yeah, that's kind of my experience. I'm going into my senior year. I'm going to take another AP English class this year. So, and I plan on advocating for my accommodations this coming year as well. So yeah, Kaya, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, sure. So I struggled mainly in math this past year with my dyslexia. As a freshman, I didn't have an honors English class option really. We had like an extra credit thing you could do, but we didn't really have a class, so that was like out of the question. But for math, I did have an option to do honors geometry instead of algebra 1, and I personally jumped at that. I already did algebra 1 in 8th grade, and I was feeling really, really confident going into that class. Um, and I had my accommodations, and I went into it very excited, and I went to every single class. I did all my homework. I paid attention in class. I took notes. And then the first test came along, and I got so excited, and I was like all ready to go. And I was like, I'm ready for this. Like, I did the practice test, and I was just so excited. And then, right when I went to go take it, my teacher wouldn't let me use any of my accommodations. And I like fully like blanked because I wasn't kind of like expecting to not have extra time and to not be allowed to use the calculator. I can never say it right. And so after that, I did terrible on the test. I failed, and I was still not going to give up. And I was like, okay, no, it's fine. And I told my mom, and my mom was like, oh, it's okay. I'll talk to the school. It was a mistake. It's a new teacher. And I go in and I keep working really, really, really hard and all of that. And then another test comes along. My mom's talked to the school. I'm ready to go with my accommodations. And then they don't listen to them. And it was like this just for like months on end. And finally, like, my mom was having, like, meetings with the school I didn't know about about my 504 becoming an IEP and, like, um, getting my accommodations that I need, and finally she was like, "Hey, Kaya, do you wanna come to one of these meetings?" And I was like, "Yes. I would love to kind of speak out on my side and, like, kinda see, like, where their concerns lie with me doing well in this class." And so I got really excited, and then the school was hesitant with me being in the meeting. They were like, "Hey, we wanna," like, they told my mom I couldn't join yet and that they wanted to discuss, like, what class I was going to be in before I showed up and basically tag team me and have me walk in and tell me what I'm gonna do instead of letting me decide. And so I walk in, they had no luck with that, and they tried telling me that I should be in Algebra 1, and I told them no. And they tried really, really hard to put me in Algebra 1, and I got really close to just giving up and saying yes and saying, "You know what? Like, maybe I'm not good enough for this class. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not smart enough." But I knew, like, in here that, like, I was smart enough and that I could do this class and that, like, I was going to do it. And so, we kept fighting with the school for a really, really long time, to the point where, like, I stopped, like, trying at a certain point because I was just working so hard to be better than I had to be and to prove to them that I was smart enough and that, like, even though they wouldn't help me and even though the school was working against me, that, like, I could be in that class. And finally I was like, "You know what? No. Why am I trying to prove myself? I'm smart enough. I know I'm smart enough." And so that's when I decided I was gonna try and transfer out of that school because I couldn't be in a place where they didn't value my work and where they didn't see me trying and doing above and beyond anyone else in that class and still failing. Um so yeah, so I had a really, really interesting year with geometry. I think our whole family has had, like, issues with geometry. I just don't think it runs in the family. But I finally just left the class. They told me that I could fail or that I could leave because they weren't going to pass me because I wasn't smart enough, and if I was really smart enough to do the class, then I wouldn't need the IEP and I wouldn't need all those accommodations. And I was just not smart. I was just too dumb to be in an honors class. And I left. And I said, "Nope, not happening. I'm not gonna fail. I'm not gonna fail a class that I passed." So I redid almost the entire course on VLAX, and then I continued to fight with the school and tell them that they weren't gonna treat me like that and that they weren't gonna say hurtful things about me and say that I'm not smart enough and that either I don't have dyslexia or I'm like they pretty much said I didn't have dyslexia because I was passing my English class, and that I wasn't using the right accommodations because the accommodations I had I didn't use because I didn't need them, but the accommodations I wanted I wasn't allowed to have because I didn't need them. Um, and so it was just like a really, really difficult year, but it really shows that, like, don't lower yourself and, like, don't always listen and take the easy way out just because other people think it's easier for them. Because yes, it would have been easier for me to go into an algebra class and just shut up and not say anything and just, like, let them push me around. But that's not what you should do. You should really stand out and be like, "No, I have these accommodations. I'm going to use these accommodations and I'm going to be in the class that I know fits." And yeah, I think that's everything on that topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big takeaway is one of the really significant pieces of advocacy that watched both girls have to navigate was this question of, well, why not just make it easier for yourself? If I had $1 for every administrator, teacher, guidance counselor, principal who said, well, why don't they just want to make it easier for themselves? And and every student certainly is different, but in my experience, both as a teacher and as a parent, what I've seen is most of these kids, one, they're not looking for the easy way out. And anybody who's navigated dyslexia, these kids already know nothing is the easy way out. They've never had anything come easy. That so even this concept of why not make it easier, I think both girls always kind of met that with a blank stare, saying, I don't even know what you mean. It's all difficult. So why not reach for what you want? And also to be in an environment with classmates that they felt challenged them, and classmates that they felt um they wanted to be in the community with. And I think that's the other piece sometimes too, that schools don't always think about, is the social component of that. That to have students, to have kids who want to be in specific classes because that is the type of learner that they see themselves as. You know, Hayden is looking at her peers and saying, I want to be in AP Lit and AP Language and Composition. I want to be in dual enrollment pre-calc. They're really hard classes, but they're classes that have the peers that I really connect to. And certainly for Kaya, who could, you know, speak to the ADHD piece as well, the focus that comes sometimes from being in an honors class where, yes, the material is more challenging, um, but the environment is often more conducive to learning than sometimes other classes where you have learners who aren't necessarily as engaged. And sometimes, frankly, that is because they have been failed in the past. They have been given this message that they are not smart enough, that they're not capable enough, that they're not able to do these things. And that's where we see the behaviors, right? That's where we see other forms of, you know, kind of acting out because they've internalized these messages. Because I know the question of accommodations comes up a lot. So if we were to look at if there are specific accommodations aside from the norm, right? Extra time, I think, is often extra time is the norm. But for math, and Hayden, you can also probably speak to AP as well, but are there specific accommodations that wouldn't necessarily be thought about, that people wouldn't necessarily have on their radar, that you think would be useful for people to know?
For me, going into AP English classes, I found in last year I took AP Language and Composition, which is definitely more of the reading aspect. So I was able to have the choice between a digital copy of the reading and a handwritten copy of the reading. And personally, for me, being able to view things on a computer is helpful because I can zoom in the text. So having that option between the digital or the on paper was really helpful for me. It was also helpful for certain AP classes. They have a requirement for certain things being written out on paper, which I always struggle with because paper doesn't have the spelling checker on it. So for those assignments where she asked us to write on paper, I was able to write on the computer, which helped me because I could spell check the words. And then also going into AP Lit, which is AP Literature, which is all about reading. I already talked with my counselor and advisors and everything about giving me a copy of each of the texts that we're going to read for either on Audible or Libby, or even the school library for me has audiobooks, and audiobooks for me have helped so much because it really cuts down reading a book in 8 hours versus 4, or 11 hours versus 5. So for me, that really saves time, and I can actually think about the text. When I read, I often forget what I'm reading or have to reread. So the fact that my teachers are able to provide me with either a digital copy or a spoken audiobook is really helpful for me. And I feel like people sometimes forget about that being an option for audiobooks and other resources. So that's really helped me in honors and AP English classes. And then I think Kaya can talk about the honors and math classes if she wants.
Oh, yes. I definitely think for honors math, I found it was really, really helpful to not only be able to use a calculator for any problem. The whole point was like, oh, it's 5 plus 5. That's easy. You don't need that. And it's like, yes, but you can easily make small mistakes when you see a certain number and you think it's a different number. I see 53 and I think it's 35. So those small, like little mistakes can really mess up the entire problem. So I found that that was very helpful, having teachers actually look at the problem and not just the answer and see where you went wrong. And if really you did everything right, you just had a small error. Um, it's like I don't know. It's different because I feel like in math, teachers just say yes or no, like correct, wrong, and it's more complicated than that. With someone who doesn't see everything like a normal person would. Um, and so I found it was really helpful for the teachers to actually tell me what I did wrong and to circle the part and to like make sure I knew that I was actually doing the problem right instead of redoing the entire problem thinking I did the entire thing wrong when it was just a small error. I also found extra time to be very helpful like everything else. It took me way longer than anyone else to finish one problem. I also found teachers helping me with word problems were really helpful. It's really, really hard to read a word problem and to pick the important things out of it. Um, Especially because for me, all the words kind of just jumbled together. So it was really helpful for them to kind of go over that and like read it out and like help me pick out exactly what they're asking me to do so I can actually do the problem right. Um, Really small things that help you get a really good end result, but aren't giving you the answer.
Yeah, and I think one of the pieces that has come up with both with the honors classes and with the AP classes is really helping the team or the teachers to value where the real learning is coming from. So for example, as an AP teacher myself, I've had discussions with my colleagues where their attitude toward audiobooks is that that's not real reading, right? We've mostly gotten away from that, I think, by now, but not entirely, especially with some older teachers who are coming from a generation where eyes on a page meant something different than taking in the information audibly. And really going back to, well, okay, but if the concept involves figurative language, if the concepts, if what we're hoping that they understand is, literary allusions and, different rhetorical devices or literary devices, whether they get that information audibly, through an audiobook or a printed page, it's no longer about the craft of reading. It's about the ability to analyze the text and to understand the text. And in the same thing with the higher level math classes, at that point, it's not about 53 versus 35. It's about understanding the larger concept behind what's happening. And I feel like some of the larger debates, if you want to call them that, have come from um, people really struggling to understand that a dyslexic learner can understand the concepts at a high level and still think that 53 is 35, or can understand literary, biblical, and different allusions in a piece of literature, but need the audiobook because reading the text would take hours and hours and hours longer and be less successful. listening to Hayden listen to audiobooks is fascinating to me because I'm not a good auditory learner. And so I sort of drift away. And then when she talks about what happened in a chapter that she's listened to, she's grabbing all of the details. She's getting the nuance of the text. And as an educator, I prefer that to somebody spark noting or whatever the, you know, whatever the spark note equivalent is now, and not getting all of that. But it can be difficult sometimes for administrators and teachers to value that in the same way. It often takes advocacy, and sometimes bringing literature, saying, okay, here's the research, you know, and I love that in the chat there are all these links to different research, because I think that for us has been very valuable to be able to present that in a non-aggressive way, to say, but no, this, you know, these kids really can do these higher level classes. I don't know if there are questions in the chat. I'm trying to think of other things that are valuable to discuss. Talked a bit about accommodations.
So what do you advise people who, you know, obviously the professor or the teacher says they're going to do the accommodations, and then you find, because you've experienced it, you find that they're really not being followed. Like, obviously you had a lot of meetings, and ladies, you had meetings with the professors and the teachers as well. What do you advise family members to do as it's sort of occurring? You know, it's like you had the math test, or you've gone into your English class, and the professor or the teacher is sort of that old school of like, well, it's not reading unless you have the book, or, you know, I'm not going to give you a calculator, but yet it's an advanced math class. So how do you help families get through that process?
I can say, and then I'll let them talk about what they do. I think one of the challenges as a parent, particularly a parent who has advocated, which I think most of the people who are here, that's why you're here, right? Because you've been advocating for your child, and it's very difficult at the high school level, and definitely my kids will attest to that, not to just launch yourself in as the mother bear and say, I can't even believe this, what are you doing? And to try to let them take that first step initially. And I would be the first to admit I'm not great at that. That is definitely a work in progress for me, because I find it so frustrating. But did you guys, I mean, I know I have a sense of how you guys navigated that, but I think it's such a valid question.
I definitely know for me, first things first, to take a deep breath and to let yourself calm down before you like talk to them about it. I find myself getting kind of angry when people don't listen and when people don't understand when you work so hard to try and help them. But I think the main thing is to just not let them silence you and to keep explaining why you need this and the logistics behind it. I know my mom and I did a lot of research and brought in like articles proving certain things to be more helpful and more beneficial for dyslexic learners. Yeah, it's also definitely can be a long process, but to just like put patience and time in it, and to just know like the end result is so rewarding when you finally can kind of help someone understand, especially so then hopefully they'll be better with other kids like you when you move on and graduate.
Yeah, I definitely agree with my sister. For me, I struggled kind of finding my voice in those conference rooms, just because I feel like elementary school and middle school, people are kind of talking for me, which I didn't mind at that age. But once you hit high school, it's really important for the student to kind of voice their own opinion. And that was a struggle for me. I kind of had to step back and remember, like, kind of seeing that I don't have to always, that what the teachers are saying aren't always completely true. and kind of reminding myself that, yeah, I can be in that class. Yes, I'm smart enough to be in that class. No, because I have dyslexia, that doesn't mean I can't do math at a high level. Like, I kind of just had to remind myself of those facts before and after going into those meetings, because I feel like within the meetings and the talking to the teachers, it's hard to not let yourself kind of get caught up in what they're trying to make you believe. So I think that that's really important. And then just to kind of work to finding your own voice. It sounds a lot easier than it is, and it's taken years for me to be able to do. So it's definitely not an easy thing to do, but yeah, kind of just like stepping forward and remembering your value and your strengths, and kind of just they're still smart. Even though you might have dyslexia, that doesn't really take away your abilities to
And
do hard things.
And I think the other thing that I would add that I think, it's variable from situation to situation and school to school, but a good case manager, that's such a valuable piece, because for a student to go to a teacher and say, hey, I have this legal document that says that I get these accommodations that you're denying me, that's a lot. And to also try to do it, as Kai said, after taking a deep breath and not making it seem adversarial is really hard. But to go to a case manager whose literal job it is to help to navigate that process and to say, hey, here's what I'm navigating, and let them be the go-between when it's difficult, or be there as part of that process and part of that discussion. Because I do think that it is an enormous ask to ask a student, to ask a kid to put themselves in that position with a teacher, but to have another adult there as an advocate in the school, who also knows the IEP or the 504, who knows the document, can be absolutely invaluable. Hayden said there's a question in the chat.
Right, we do have a family member who's asking if they have the right to ask for either like a push-in or an inclusion model in these higher level courses.
I want a little bit of a clarification there when we're talking about push-in and inclusion.
Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully,
Sometimes push-in, like I've heard it used in different ways. I've heard it, instead of pulling out, having like a one-on-one in the classroom as a push-in. So I mean, I think the answer no matter what is yes, but I'm curious if there's kind of more context there, but the answer really is whatever accommodation the student gets per their IEP or 504, but really oftentimes per their IEP, they get. And so if that is an accommodation that they get, that is an accommodation that follows them to the class that they take. And that is, oh, like co-taught with with the special ed teacher. Yeah, it's tough. It depends, because I know in the school district that I teach at, we're, as many districts are, we're awfully short-staffed. So oftentimes if there is a special ed teacher, if there is a co-teacher, those are often at the foundational level classes, not necessarily at like an honors or an AP level class. But that being said, what I would think about are, what are the accommodations that are necessary, and then how can those still be met? Because it's possible that there wouldn't be another body in the room, that there wouldn't be a co-teacher, that there wouldn't be a special ed teacher there. However, what that might mean is that your student takes some of the material and goes to their case manager and goes into a different separate space to work. I know both girls have done that at different times, where they're, they need that extra support, or if they need to go over something orally and it would be distracting for the class, or they need that extra time, they physically go to their case manager, or they go to a separate space, and that's where they do some of that work. So I think there are definitely ways to make it work. And again, the other reality is, depending on what the necessary accommodation is, you look at the accommodation and say, well, yeah, how can we still achieve that? Is it through going to a case manager sometimes, or a separate office? Or is this something that can be accommodated by the regular classroom teacher, but just takes a little more legwork to do it? And sometimes that's the issue. We have definitely run into that. I believe one of the lines in one of the meetings was, "Yes, but you're making this harder for the teacher." Yeah, I guess. I mean, at the end of the day, speaking from the teacher's perspective, it is our job to do our job, and it is not the student's job to make our job as a teacher easier. I mean, obviously, they have to do their part. They have to be willing to put the work in. They have to be willing to put all the extra work in because it takes more as a dyslexic learner. But having listened to people say, "Well, you're making the teacher's job more difficult," I think you just take a step back and say, well, we're a team here. Let's work on it together. But at the end of the day, it's our job to help these kids get the education they deserve. I don't know if
Yeah.
that helps.
That I think that's super helpful. Thank you. Has universal design for learning come up like in the conversation of accommodations for like when you're in like middle school and high school? It's a big topic, obviously, in the elementary school world, but I was wondering if it'd come up in the middle school and high school world at all. Not too much. Okay, just wondered. Yeah.
And,
Because-
and I had a question for both Kaya and Hayden. Now, you talked about the frustrations that you've felt and the aggravation too. Have you had any experiences where you've felt like you really made a difference by explaining this to either teachers or administrators, where you feel like, yes, I think I made a difference. I think I shed some light on this and were able to change their thinking about dyslexia and accommodations?
I think that was always my goal going into it. And I think I definitely did. Some teachers, I don't think they will learn. But I do know some that really did like start to understand, and I think moving forward there are definitely going to be other kids, and I'm hoping that when their cases come up there is not as much of a fight or fight at all to get what they need. And that's always been what I've wanted to do, speaking out loud so other kids don't have to.
The superintendent too, Kaya, I think that
Oh,
piece
yes.
was significant.
Yeah, I had a meeting with the superintendent and I kind of explained the whole situation to him when I was trying to convince him to let me go to a different school. And I definitely think he was shocked. And I really don't think he knew what was happening in his school district. I don't think he really understood when people said these teachers aren't understanding my kid. I don't think he really understood until a kid walked in and said, "Hey, this is how I'm being treated." And I definitely think that he will look at these other cases and really understand them more.
Well, that's good. It seems like as hard as you both have worked, it's nice that you would get, if you would get some kind of satisfaction, and thank you.
Well, obviously, I mean, your entire family is amazing and you're doing such hard work with all that self-advocacy. Because like you said, we can say it, but it's not easy. What like social emotional support do you get other than obviously your family unit, but what have you been receiving, or what does even school provide to help with all this self-advocacy that you're doing? Or is there
Or
something school should do?
yeah, kind of like what my mom said earlier about having a case manager, that has really helped me. Having a person who I can go to and talk about my experience in the classroom and have them be a part of the school so they can find a way to help me to make a difference is very helpful. Even just to be a person that I can talk to about my experiences, even just throughout the day with everyday life stuff, is really I think, beneficial. It doesn't always have to be like a huge issue that I have to go to meetings to solve, or I have to work out with the teacher. Sometimes it can just be a small, hey, this happened today in the classroom and it kind of made me upset. And having a person to talk to about that is really helpful, I think, especially a person who's a part of the school system. And then again, also in those meetings, kind of being an extra voice. And I know many times I've gone to my case manager before a big meeting about maybe a teacher not following my IP, situations like that, and kind of having them prepare me for the meeting and kind of ask me, hey, what do you want to come out of this meeting? What do you want to happen? And having them help me get to my main goal. Because again, like we said earlier, having the student do all the work is very challenging. So having another person in the school system being on your side, I found to be very helpful. So
Having someone in your corner, as
Mhm.
you say it, yes.
That's great. So as you're starting to look into, the next part of your educational career, what are some of the things that families should start like gathering or thinking about, just, think 8th grade, 9th grade, and then all the way up through, it's because it's, as applying for schools or, whatever you're going to do as the next step usually involves a process. So what would you recommend for people to look into? Like, should they have more recent evaluations or what should they do?
They definitely need an evaluation within that the 3 years. So ideally, junior or senior year. The understanding that it doesn't follow you to college, right? Those accommodations don't follow you. There's a lot of discussion about switching from an IEP to a 504 because a 504 follows you to college and an IEP doesn't. That's not true. The law that governs the 504 follows you to college, the legal right to not be discriminated against. But the accommodations themselves do not follow you to college, no matter whether you have a 504 or an IEP. So one of the things that we're looking at, that Hayden's looking at, especially now, and Kai is starting to, are what are the different accommodations that different colleges provide, and how are those accessed? So we've got this whole range. One of the schools that Hayden looked at, it's just a natural part of the fabric of their school. Anybody who wants the accommodations can utilize them. They have just an enormous number of resources that are available. One of the other schools that she was looking at, they provide them at a fee. So you pay $5,000 to be enrolled in a program that helps with everything from executive functioning to all of these accommodations at extra time. And I think they work with the professors to kind of advocate for these different accommodations. But it comes with a fee because it's a specific program. And so I think understanding what the school provides and being willing to ask those questions, I think is really vital, because what you probably don't want is to end up in a situation where you're in a college or a university and then you find out that, that those accommodations aren't there. I think one of the things we are finding, though, is that it's becoming much more common for colleges and universities to have something and to state it to everybody when we're on tours. Do you agree, Hayden? It comes up. It's not something you really have to ask. They generally, especially if they offer different programs and different accommodations, they tend to be pretty upfront about those. But also really looking at early on in high school, what do you need? Will you be able to get a waiver for language, or do you really need to take X number of years of a math class, or lab science, if that's something that's going to be challenging, and is that going to shut any doors? Because the sooner you find out, Kaya going into sophomore year, that's her whole thing right now with language, right? Is what is she really going to need? And reaching out to some of those colleges that she might maybe be interested in a few years, and to say, okay, if I'm not able to complete 3 years of Spanish, but I do 1 year of Spanish and 2 or 3 years of ASL, does that hurt me? And it varies depending on the college. I think, what else am I missing there? In terms of course load, have your counselors talked to you about, is there anything else that's come up looking forward?
I mean, yeah, I think the programs in place for different colleges is really important. I also think in high school, having the experimental stage for what accommodations you feel like most benefit you will, I'm speaking for my future self, will probably help me going into college, because then I can put in place, this is what helps me, so this is what I would like to be given in those programs and accommodations. So kind of figuring out, like, do I benefit from extra time, or do I benefit from a different space to do my work? Kind of just figuring that out before you step out of high school and into college, is definitely, I think, very beneficial.
Yeah, and then finding colleges that approach it the same way, because with the
Mhm.
understanding that you can't go into the college and then say, oh, and by the way, I need all these things. But what you can do is in the application process and in the interviewing process, in the touring process, say, these are things that benefit me. How is your school set up for that? And if it's an enormous university with 300-person lecture halls, they might not be. If it's a smaller school or a different program, you know, so I think that's valid. Oh, the question came up, did you get your IEP accommodations in dual credit and AP classes?
Yes, I did. At some of them were harder than others. But for me, I think the meeting at the end of last year was the first meeting where, talking about my course load, they brought up and asked me the question, what accommodations do you think you'll need going into AP English? And that was like kind of breathtaking to hear, because I'd never been asked that question. I've always had to fight for the accommodations that I need, and at some point they're given to me, due to my and my family's advocating skills. But they finally asked me, what accommodations do you need? And I was able to tell them. So hopefully going into my year, that will be given. Again, if the teacher does not apply those accommodations, sometimes all they need is a simple reminder and then they're great about it. Other times, yes, it has to turn into a meeting. So personally, for me, I have been able to accomplish my and given my accommodations I've needed. But sometimes it does sadly take a little bit extra fight to be given, but it's all circumstantial, and kind of based on the teacher, but your accommodation should be given no matter what class you're in. And that should never be a fight. Sadly, it has been. But yeah, in the end, I have gratefully gotten those accommodations, but sadly, a lot of the times you do need to fight.
And just as a practical matter for AP exams, if a student qualifies for extra time through the College Board, which would be the PSATs and the SATs, then they automatically qualify for extra time on AP exams. So it's the same College Board that does the AP exams that also does the PSATs and SATs. So it actually makes it a slightly easier process in some ways, because once that paperwork is submitted for the PSATs and SATs, it's already there. So you don't have to do anything extra for that. And then dual enrollment, the way it generally works with the colleges that are the dual enrollment, they take whatever the sending high school sends them. So usually the way that works is whatever accommodations are given to a student in their class, that grade that they get in that class transfers to the college credit. Hayden's situation was a little bit different because they had like 2 different grades kind of. So they had the grade that reports out to the college, which was actually different from the grade in class because they didn't allow the grade to go to the college with the accommodations. If we had a little more energy last year, maybe we would have fought that battle too. But, you know, you also have to look at your emotional, mental bandwidth and decide what's really worth it. Personally, it's not actually how that's supposed to work. They are supposed to actually just get the grade that's sent by the high school. So if you are in a situation where they say, oh, no, the grade that goes to the college is without accommodations because colleges don't use accommodations, and so we can't do that, that's actually not true. The college actually, they will take what the high school sends them, and because high schools do use IEPs and 504s, the grade that gets transferred should be an accurate representation of the grade with those allowed accommodations. So if a school says, oh, your student can't do a dual enrollment class because the colleges don't accept IEPs and accommodations and it's a college class, so therefore we can't, that is actually not accurate. And having done a lot of dual enrollment classes and gone through their trainings, I have yet to encounter a school that has said otherwise. Every college has said, oh, no, we take what the high school gives us. So it's worth knowing that. And the same thing with AP. If they say, oh, no, AP is a college level class, therefore you can't have accommodations, that's also not true. I've been teaching AP for 15 years. That has never been the case. So, and I don't think that it's people being hostile. I think it's sometimes that they really don't know. They see that it's a college class and they make those assumptions. I don't think it's necessarily meant to be, you know, to close those doors. I think oftentimes they really don't realize that that's actually not accurate.
All right, this say from a an educator perspective, what do you want, you know, middle school, high school teachers to know? Like what can we do to help middle school and high school educators and, you know, professors of, you know, college level professors and instructors? What, you know, what can we do to help them?
I think that kind of having schools give their teachers resources to either teach them about the different learning disabilities or have them doing their own research is super powerful. I remember I did a presentation to my elementary school when I was in, I want to say freshman in high school. I did a presentation to my elementary school teachers and I kind of gave them my knowledge on dyslexia and how it impacts a student and throughout their school. And I got a lot of responses from teachers kind of saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea, or I can't believe this wasn't taught to me earlier. And kind of those things where I was grateful to help them learn something that they didn't know to help other generations. But I do think that that should be something that schools are providing and or something that teachers are researching and kind of getting familiar with, especially if you see that a student has a learning disability, kind of getting yourself familiarized with it. Of course, every student is different, but I think that having a teacher who's willing to understand or has previous knowledge is beneficial for me. Yeah, that's kind of my say.
What do you think, Kaya? What would you like just to know?
I don't know. I think Hayden said it all. I don't think there's really anything else.
That's fabulous. Thank
Yeah, I
you.
think I would add that, you know, and they've both said this over and over, but the capability of these students and the work ethic and that when a teacher says, oh, why don't you make it easier, what the message that they're sending inadvertently is you can't do this, and instead to encourage them. And even if it's harder, I've had students in AP classes who I know are going to struggle because I know the material and I know it's going to be hard for them. And my feeling on it is if they're willing to be there and they're willing to put the work in, I'm willing to support them. And I think that collectively teachers have to maybe take that approach as a guide and say, okay, it's not always about what's the easiest way to get an A. Sometimes it's what are you willing to put in for work, even if it means that, it's not going to be an easy A, it's going to be a task.
Well, you're getting kudos from the attendees. Just so you know, everyone is saying thank you for hosting the presentation. Everyone is so articulate. It's there for you to read, but it's amazing. And thank you for your expertise and your thoroughness. And the student perspective is just critical to all of us. So we can't thank you all enough, because you're living it, and we want to be able to support you in every way we can. So we want to say thank you. Before we end, is there like a favorite app or something or tool that you have that you're like, this is the thing that's working for me the best right now? Because obviously, all our software engineers are out there building new things, but are there cool things that you're like, nope, this is the thing that's working for me now, and I really like it? Is there anything there that you could mention to people?
For me, I love Grammarly, and I said this before, I love Audible so much, but even if you don't have access to Audible, for me, my town library and my school library offer audiobooks, which I think is something a lot of people forget about. So that's been super helpful for me, but also Grammarly extension on my computer. I'm lucky enough that my school supplies it, but that I love for spelling and grammar and everything.
Me too.
Yeah.
The gorilla.
What about
Kaya,
you, Kaya? Are there any ones that you can think of?
I'm not really sure. I also know, I'm not sure how many people actually use this, but if you happen to have Spotify Premium, I found out there are audiobooks on there. So it's super random, but that's actually what I use, and I didn't know about it. And it's just like another perk to Spotify that I could not stress enough. But yes.
great. Well, thank you so much. This has just been fabulous. Everyone is just saying thank you. And again, it's just been wonderful. So thank you. We cannot thank you enough. This was great. Just so everyone knows, this will be uploaded to our website within about 7 days. So you can take a look at it again.
Thank you so much, all of you, for giving your personal perspective and enlightening us and spending your evening with us here at IDA-NNEA. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us.
Okay, and just a few things before our guests leave us. IDA-NNEA is hosting a free upcoming event on September 25th, where you can earn up to 2 professional development hours. Register today for Structured Literacy 101 with Nicole Chick. We have upcoming Read for Parents. The next one is October 9th, and it's Dyslexia and Charting for Success, Linking Psychoeducational Assessment and Reading Science with CADS, with special guest Brenda Peters. Our upcoming Read for Professionals is on November 13th, featuring integrating the science of reading within a multi-tiered system of supports with special guest Rachel Brown-Chidsey. Please complete our survey at the end of the session, and thank you again to the Miskinis family, Elaine, Hayden, and Kaya. It's a pleasure spending the evening with you. Thank you so much.